good evening, and welcome to What's Your Story? I'm your host, James Ransom Reed Jr. We have a very serious but important show for you tonight. My guest is Jessica Pisano. She's the Director of Victim Services for Homicide survivors, those of us, and I say us, who have been living with the nightmare of having a member of our family killed. Please pay attention tonight. She's going to impart to you information that can help you through what must be one of the darkest periods in anyone's life. Welcome, Jessica.
Welcome. Thank you so much for having me.
Oh, I'm so happy that you took the time to honor us and come here.
Thank you.
So thank you so very much. You know, would you please tell the audience before we start about yourself? Where were you born?
I was born in Bristol, Connecticut.
Bristol.
Yes.
And?
Well, I live in Terryville now. I went to school at the University of Connecticut.
All right.
I graduated with a Bachelor of Science in Human Development and Family Studies, and I have a minor in Women's Studies.
What's women's studies?
So basically, when I went to UConn, it was kind of a minor that focused on treatment of women, how domestic violence affected women, kind of discrimination, even things like women in the arts and how we were represented in arts and things like that. So it was a really interesting kind of minor for me to have. I wasn't entirely sure what I wanted to do, and it kind of helped me figure that out.
And where did you go to high school?
I went to Bristol Eastern High School.
What was your school's mascot? I ask everybody that.
We were the Lancers.
A Lancer.
We were the Lancers.
All right now. What did you do in high school? Did you run? Did you play track, baseball? What did you do?
I was actually in the band. So
okay, talk about it. Tell us.
Yeah, so I'm the typical band geek. I absolutely loved it. So I did everything from the marching band to jazz band to orchestra. I played flute, piccolo, and oboe.
Man, have you kept up that?
Unfortunately not,
yes.
No. But I've heard it's like riding a bike. So once you learn, you never kind of forget it.
Yes. What do you remember most fondly about your high school days?
I remember, it's actually funny, playing at football games in the marching band and being freezing cold. It was just something about it was just fun. And I think those are probably, anything related to band or performing are probably my best memories that I had in high school.
What about at college?
Oh my. Well, actually, when I went to UConn happened to be the time period where both the men and the women's basketball team won the national championship.
Oh, yes, I remember that. Yeah.
So it was a really exciting time. I really liked the major that I ended up being in. So I worked a lot. I tried to come home when I can, but I was very much wanting to graduate within 4 years. So I tried very hard to be able to buckle down to be able to do that.
Now, in addition to your college degree in high school, what special training do you have?
Oh, time.
There you go.
Really,
that's a perfect answer.
Yeah,
experience, time.
Yeah. I don't have a master's degree. I don't have, fancy letters after my name. But what I do have is probably almost 20 years of experience in the victim service field. I started as soon as I graduated from college. I started in domestic violence programs, and then I moved over to survivors of homicide.
Domestic violence conjures up many images.
Yes.
That it happens only to poor women, women of color, poorly educated women. True or false?
False. 100% false.
Talk to me.
Anyone can be a victim of domestic violence. It doesn't matter if you're male. It doesn't matter if you're female. It doesn't matter if you live in Simsbury or if you live in Hartford. The Connecticut can average anywhere from 14 to 20 intimate partner homicides a year. This is a problem that exists across the state. And it's something that just keeps getting worse and worse, unfortunately. And there aren't a lot of resources available. Domestic violence shelters are at maximum capacity right now. Funding is getting slashed. But in the same time, especially since COVID, there's been a large spike in domestic violence and domestic murder.
Because people are trapped.
Yes. And housing is a huge problem. It's very easy to tell someone experiencing domestic violence that you just need to leave your partner, but it's not that simple. Even look at an example of the housing environment now. Where are you going to go? People can't find apartments as it is. You're fleeing an abusive relationship and you need to leave. You could be waiting a year to try to get an apartment. So it's not as simple as just leaving the situation.
What are some signs that people need to look out for? Potential batterers. What are some signs? May I address you as Jessica?
Yes, you can.
Okay.
Yes.
What are some signs? I want to use this pulpit to help educate men and women,
Yes.
but the signs.
Yes.
You know, it's not just, it doesn't just happen, as I understand it. It's a progression.
It is.
And it often starts in the dating phase.
Yes.
Okay, please talk to me.
So here's an example I use. If you went out on a first date with someone,
Yes.
you're sitting at dinner, and all of a sudden they reach across the table and smack you across the face, are you going to go on a second date with that person? No. And that's not the way abusive relationships start out either. People who are abusive can come across as being completely normal people. And I think the biggest kind of misnomer about domestic violence is that people are not abused unless they're being physically hit. And that is simply not true. Emotional abuse, financial abuse. I've encountered many cases where people have been killed and there was never physical violence going on. It was all emotional, it was financial, it was sexual. But I think in society, we still have this mindset sometimes that you have to be physically hit in order to be abused. We really need to get away from that. It could be texting, someone who texts you 20 times a day, telling you, well, I just worry, I love you, I want to make sure that you're okay. Those are all signs of coercion and control. Those are big warning signs that we tend to see across the board. But people don't always look at it that way. It's, well, they care about me, they're worried about me.
Yeah. Wow. I don't even know how to address it except to provide a forum for people to talk about it and to learn. Now, do you involve yourself with training batterers?
I do not. No, Connecticut does have some programs out there, but unfortunately, they're very difficult to get into. Most of the programs that exist are for people who are going through the court system, that have been arrested. It's almost impossible for an average person to decide, well, I want help, I'm going to enter one of these programs. There's not space, they can't do it. And that's what's really frustrating is, you know, people who abuse need to want to change their behaviors. They need to want to change their actions. And it's really heartbreaking when you encounter someone that wants to change and they can't get into a program because they're full of people going through the court system. So that's a big part of it. Absolutely.
Am I wrong, or are women, by and large, the victims of domestic violence, whatever its form?
Correct. Yes, women are still primarily the victims of domestic violence. We do see more incidents as years go by with males, but it's still very difficult to males to talk about domestic violence. They are ridiculed by people. Well, you're a guy, she's a girl. Can't you just fight her off and make her not hit you? The other kind of issue is for male victims, there aren't as many services available. They don't have domestic violence shelters specifically for men. Domestic violence shelters won't take in abused men. They have to often be put into hotels. So on top of having the stigma of who's going to believe me that I'm being abused, there's really not a lot of services out there for them. Even a support group, domestic violence support groups are very common, but they're almost always for women, always.
And we are still slashing services to help address this issue.
Correct. Yes. A huge source of funding for both my organization, Survivors of Homicide, as well as domestic violence shelters and services. Actually, our funding was cut 50% last year, 50%. Luckily, the state of Connecticut, the governor was able to put a plan into place to give us some emergency funds to try to help us through this time period, but it's not guaranteed forever. 50%'s a large amount.
Ugh.
It would decimate services as we know it. Shelters would close, agencies would close, because there just simply are not the monetary resources out there to keep them open even on a basic functional level.
Do you have a theory as to why it's so low on the totem pole and yet so prevalent in our society?
We focus a lot on rehabilitation with offenders, which is not a problem. I understand that people in the criminal justice system deserve services, but if you ever pull up budgets, state budgets are available for anyone to view. If you compare services for offenders compared to services for victims, there's a huge difference. They receive a lot more funding than victim services are able to. The other problem that has arisen is a large source of our funding comes from something called VOCA. And it stands for Victim of Crime Act. It was actually something established by President Reagan in the early 80s. And basically, the money is really interesting, and it's very unique in that it's money that's seized from criminals on the federal court level. So if someone, actually, Samsung's a great example. Samsung got into trouble a few years ago for I don't even know what, but they got fined. So all of that money gets put into this fund that can only be used to provide funding for victim services or for crime victims compensation. That's the only thing this money can be used for. Problem is, once COVID happened, the court shut down. There was no cases going on. So having no cases means there's no money. And we're dealing with that situation right now. Is the fund emptied? We're hoping that at some point it's going to replenish itself, but there's no way to be able to tell how long that's going to take.
All right, so you finish college.
Yep.
You get involved with this.
Yep.
And it's 17 years later and you're still there.
Still here.
Did you expect you would be doing this 17 years later?
No, I didn't at all. I loved the work. I think I love the work even more now than when I had first started. But realistically, no, it's tough work. It's extremely tough work. It's draining. Your heart breaks for these families that you work with. But I found I get to work with some of the best people in the world. We actually don't call them clients, we call them members. They often say that we're all members of a group that no one wants to be part of. We're part of the club that nobody ever wants to join. But they're grateful that we're here when they do need us.
What exactly is Survivors of Homicide? What is it?
So we were actually founded in 1983. We were founded by a couple, Sherry and Gary Merton, and their daughter was murdered by her boyfriend. So they entered this criminal justice system. I believe this happened in 81 or 82. They were thrust into this system where there were no victim services there. There were no victim advocates. There were no support groups. There was no one, there was no people out there to provide support. They actually watched in the court system and were told, we don't represent you or your daughter, we represent the state of Connecticut. And they decided that this could not be this way and something had to change. So they actually started holding support groups in their living room, believe it or not. And we just kind of grew from there. We're actually still a really small organization. There's actually only 2 employees, myself, and I have an advocate. Her name is Sue. She works in the southern part of the state, and it's just the 2 of us for the entire state of Connecticut. We're the only organization in the state that solely provides services to family and friends of homicide victims, and we're one of a handful in the entire country.
What is the mission?
So our mission statement is to provide counseling, support, and advocacy to family and friends of homicide victims is our mission statement.
You actually meet with people who are
I do.
Who are family members of people who've been killed.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so we do one-on-one counseling. We're not a clinical facility. We do make referrals to other places, but we do one-on-one counseling. We do home visits. We run various support groups throughout the month, and we also provide court support. So going to hearings, attending trials, these are all things that we help families with. We help them fill out paperwork. Maybe if they can't get a hold of their detective, we can make phone calls for them. So we try to meet people where they're at that. Not everyone needs the same services. Not everyone stays with us for an extended period of time. We have some people that have been with us for 30 years, but we have some people that maybe only reached out to us once or twice for services. So it varies across the board, but I also think it what makes us unique.
You have your own family, right?
I do.
So what emotional toll does dealing with that for 17 years, excuse me, and seeing it get worse and funding slashed and, you're heartbroken because people are suffering because they've lost loved ones. Jessica, talk to us about the human toll that must take.
It's large. Some days are definitely harder than others, and I think, wow, I don't know how much longer I can do this. A few specific incidents is after Hartford Distributor shooting happened in 2010, and after Sandy Hook happened in such close time, I really had to think very hard about whether or not this was something that I felt I could continue doing. But one of the things that my coworker and I always talk about is someone has to fight the good fight. Somebody has to do this. And if it's going to be anyone, I would love it to be us. I don't look at this as a career. This is part of my life now. When I got married, I had some of our members that actually came to my wedding. They're my family now. We go out to dinner. I've been to birthdays and christenings. So that's what keeps me going, is the relationships that I have. One of the things we say is grief, you never get over grief. There is no closure. Grief is a journey, and it's something that you go through. And so I think that that's kind of what I carry when I work with my families, and it's an honor to be able to see them on their journey to build their new life and to see them take steps. Sometimes there's forward, sometimes they're back, but I am honored to be a part of their journey and that they allow me to be able to do that. It's terrifying to talk to a complete stranger about the most horrible thing that you've ever experienced in your entire life. It's even more terrifying to think about coming to a support group that's made up of people who have had this horrible thing happen to them. But one of the things that I have found that our members have told us is that it's nothing like they think that it would be. We laugh just as much as we cry. We provide support for each other. They share stories because we have some people that have been with us for so long, they know exactly where the new people are at that are coming in, and they provide support. I am not a survivor of homicide, so I never tell people I understand what you're going through because I don't understand what they're going through, but our membership does. And that's the other part, I think, of what makes us really special.
Now, why, if you met somebody who didn't know, i.e. me, why is what you do important? Why?
Oh, that's a good question. Because these families need unconditional support during a time when society can shun them.
What do you mean by society shunning them?
Well, here's a great example. You lose a loved one. It could be from anything, not just homicide. What typically happens the first few days after a loss? You're planning services. People are dropping off food. People are staying at your house and helping you with things. But what happens when the funeral's over? Everybody goes home. Everyone goes back to living their own life, but this is your life now. This is the reality for our families now. There is no going back. And people mean well, but often what we try to do sometimes is we try to fix people. We try to fix their grief. We want to make them better. And when there's often an expectation from society that you need to get over this now. You need to move on with your life. Your loved one wouldn't want you to be sad. Even to the point where family and friends will pretend like they don't know you anymore and that your loved one never existed. I've had people tell me that, they've lived in their town their whole life, and after they've lost their child, they walk into a grocery store and they see a neighbor who will actually turn and walk right away from them. And it's not because people are trying to be mean, it's because they're scared and they don't know what to say. And often when we're terrified of something, we try to find a way to distance ourselves from that, to say, well, I don't live in Hartford, so that can't happen to me. I'm a certain demographic, I make this much money, well, that can't happen to me, because it's how people try to protect themselves from the thought that something that horrible could affect somebody that they love. But in turn, as a result of that, our families are feeling like people are not recognizing their grief. They're expecting them to get over their sense of grief, and that they're just not being supportive at all.
Which is why we constantly hear people say, it's like you said, come on, it's time to move on. You can't carry this forever, And while it's well intended, it's also very brutal, is it not?
Extremely brutal, extremely, and it actually re-victimizes our families. It re-traumatizes them. It affects them emotionally, it affects them physically, it affects them mentally. They feel alone and they feel lost, and that's often when they'll reach out to us for services. It isn't usually immediately after the homicide happens. It's usually a few months, and it's because of that reason. They feel as though no one else in their life wants to talk about what happened, and that's when they tend to reach out and want services from us.
Just because as you're talking, I'm just feeling honestly a bit overwhelmed by the enormity of the problem, how it continues. Let's say I wanted to help out. What special training do I need in order to do that? Or do I need any special training?
Depends on what you would want to do to help, to be honest.
What are some ways that...
Yeah, so one of the things we're doing now is we're actually trying to start getting in-person support groups going again. It's something that we've had a really hard time doing since COVID. So I'm in the process now, and my fingers are crossed, and that there might be one or two opportunities coming up in the near future. And we're looking for people who might be interested in facilitating a support group. We'd offer training for things like that. But other things that people do, they wouldn't need training for. We're always looking for people to join our board of directors. We're actually looking for that now.
How many members on your board?
Oh, we have 7 right now.
And what is the board charged with doing?
All the stuff that we don't have time for, which is a lot, but it's not. Sue and I do try to do as much as we can to keep the financial aspect of things, to take care of the paperwork. The big part of what our board does is fundraising is a huge thing, and that's kind of the main thing that we're really looking for board members to help us with right now, is to set up some fundraisers for us right now. Board members that would be interested in helping us with a support group, that would be interested in getting us opportunities to go set up informational tables and to be able to do outreach, to be able to even just spread word of mouth about events that we're having. Those are kind of, big parts. Help us with correspondences and letters and look for grants for us. We don't ask a ton from our board members. We typically meet, every month or one to 3 months. We usually have a meeting for usually about an hour or two, and we do it virtually now, which is very easy. And basically the biggest thing we look for are people with fresh ideas who care.
So do you have any survivors of homicide on your board?
So that's actually the other thing that makes this really unique, is actually our board right now, and for the most part, are all survivors of homicide.
Okay.
And they're all volunteers. They all have full-time jobs, and they come together to still be able to do that.
Wow.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
We're going to do a little bit more of this, if that's okay with you.
Fine. Absolutely.
All right. So we'll wrap up this part and get to part 2. All right.
Sure.
That's all the time we have for this part of my interview with Jessica Pisano. Homicide survivors. Think about that phrase. Like she said, we all want to think it can't happen to us because of where we live, because of where we went to school, because of our zip codes. Nothing is further from the truth. And maybe this show is making you uncomfortable. In a sense, it should, because it can happen to you. That's all the time we have for this portion of my interview. Part 2 is coming up. I'm James Ransom Reed Jr. This is What's Your Story? Everybody has a story. What's yours? Until next time, good night.
The Saybrook Fish House in Canton has been serving fresh seafood, chicken, and steak entrees for 34 years, offering 3 cozy dining room settings, a newly renovated pub with craft beer, wine by the glass, specialty cocktails, and a lighter fare menu. Open for lunch and dinner 7 days a week. Reservations accepted for parties of 2 to 42, and gift certificates are also available. The Saybrook Fish House, nestled at the crossroads of Route 44, 202, and 179 in Canton.